The Christian music industry is the greatest thing in the entire history of the entire earth. Okay, maybe it's not that good. I think there are a lot of good things about it, but I'm actually making this video as a follow-up to a video that I put out last week, which I'll link down in the description below, about how the Christian music industry is destroying, is ruining our corporate worship when we gather together as a church on Sunday mornings. In that video, I talked about a lot of the negative sides of the Christian music industry that have come into the church through the Christian music industry, and the point of me doing that was so that we could identify those negative things that are coming about as a result of the Christian music industry. We can lean away from those and into the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video, which are the things that the Christian music industry, the way that it is fueling our corporate worship and actually adding fuel to the fire and improving our corporate worship experience as a church. Now, how's that happening? Well, I think one of the most practical ways that the Christian music industry is fueling, in a good way, our corporate worship is that songs are more recognizable these days. More people know the songs that we're singing in church on Sunday. I think back to like before the radio existed, or even, when the radio existed, how did people learn songs when they got together as a church? They would come together on Sunday morning and they would open up their hymnal and sight read it, but they wouldn't really know the songs, and it would probably take them a lot longer to learn a song than it does today, because now we have the Christian music industry with the CCLI Top 100 and the Praise Charts Top 100, and we can see what the most popular songs are in the Christian music industry right now, and that doesn't mean that they're automatically the best songs to do at our church, but we know that at least some people in our church will know them. And that means that when we introduce a new song on Sunday, sure, there will be people in our church who don't regularly listen to Christian music, but there will probably be a lot of people in our church who do, and if we pick a popular song that they've heard before, then they will already know it, and the first time that we do it, they can participate and help us lead it, help guide the people who don't already know the song. Not only that, not only does it help us when we gather with our church on Sunday mornings, but if we ever get together with different churches in our areas, I've experienced this one firsthand many times now, I think in terms of not just our personal church, the church that we go to on Sunday mornings, but the corporate church. When the corporate church gathers together for corporate worship at a worship conference, at a night of worship you're hosting in whatever city you live in, whatever town you live in, we can pick songs that everybody knows, and I think that it makes that time of worship that much more powerful, because then the people of God can actually sing together, and we don't have these 7 different churches with 7 different sets of songs, but we have churches that they're all singing Waymaker, at least they were for a season, and they all know how great is our God, and they all know Great Are You, Lord, and we can pick those songs if we are ever in an environment together with people from different churches. And when we pick those songs, that facilitates a better corporate worship experience because everybody knows those songs, or at least the majority of people do. I don't think that this was quite as possible as it is nowadays with the rise of the Christian music industry. Another thing that we can celebrate about the Christian music industry is that people now have a more vibrant musical worship life than they ever did before, because musical worship is that much more accessible. Think about, once again, before streaming platforms, before the radio, before the rise of the Christian music industry, and really the music industry in general, not just the Christian music industry, people didn't have access to music like they did before. And so now that they have access to it, we have facilitated more musical worship and praising God. Imagine if you didn't have a streaming service, if you didn't have that accessible. Imagine if you didn't have the radio. I'm not saying that musical worship and praising God couldn't happen, because worship isn't just singing, and we don't need the radio to musically worship God. But I'm betting that there are a lot more people worshiping musically than there were before, because now Christian music is constantly in front of us, or at least we have the opportunity for it to be constantly in front of us, which means that we can worship God when we're cooking dinner in the kitchen musically. We can worship God when we're driving in our cars because the radio is on or our phone is synced up to a streaming service. And so I think that the Christian music industry, I mean, I don't have any empirical data on this, but I've got to imagine that it has given us more of a chance, at least more of a reminder to praise God throughout the day, because there's always, people love music, there's always music on. And how does that fuel our corporate worship? Well, that fuels our corporate worship because our personal worship times flow in to our public worship times. And that means that the people in your church, if they have been worshiping more personally, then they will worship to a greater degree, if that's even a thing. I'm not sure how to word that, if I'm being honest. But they will worship more when they're in public because they will be used to worshiping in private, even in as small of a form as it is just listening to a Christian song. If they do that more in private, they will be more apt to do it in public, fueling our corporate worship gatherings. Now, the Christian music industry has also given us as worship leaders a great advantage, and that is that there are more and better songs than there have ever been before. There are more songs to choose from. We'll talk about that more in a second because you might think that's a negative. There are more songs to choose from, and there are better songs to choose from. And here's what I mean by that. First of all, there are more songs because, I mean, you have seen the meteoric rise of the Christian music industry over the past 10, 20 years, however, it's probably been longer than that now. But you've seen it rise, and now there are a bunch of worship bands. I mean, I don't know if you looked on Spotify how many worship bands there would be, but there would be a whole lot of them. And that means that there are more songs at our disposal than ever before. And I know that that can be a negative thing because it's like, how am I going to wade through all of these songs? Well, guess what? You don't have to wade through all of the songs. I think that that's a false tension that we feel, that we always have to introduce the newest and best song. What I want us to focus on instead is the positive, that because there are more songs, there are better songs. And here's what I mean by that. As we produce more things, it follows that not only will there be more quantity, but there will be more quality. And I think that there is a proportional rate there where if we wrote, let's say, 100 songs, let's say 25 of those would be good and usable in a corporate worship setting, songs that we would actually want to teach our church. Now let's multiply that by 10 and say that there are 1,000 songs written. Well, now we have 250 good songs to choose from. And so even though there's a larger option of songs to choose from, there is also a larger option of good songs to choose from. And I think another aspect of it is that the Christian music industry has allowed people to specialize in songwriting for the church. I think back to like Bach and Beethoven and the songs that they wrote, right? How did they get to write these songs, like the Hallelujah chorus? How did they get to write these songs? Well, the church literally hired them. They commissioned these songs from Handel. And they said, we are going to pay you specifically to write songs for the church. And that became his life's work. And the same thing is happening with Phil Wickham and Hillsong and Maverick City Music and Elevation Worship. A lot of those people have other responsibilities too, like they serve in their church. But one of the responsibilities that they have is to write songs for the church. They now get to specialize in that. Whereas before, when we didn't have a Christian music industry, as many people at least, weren't being paid to write songs, which is not just about getting the money, right? But it is about being able to spend your time instead of working at another job in some other industry. They get to work in that industry now and create better songs. And we get to benefit from that as worship leaders because now we have not just more better songs, is that a phrase? Not just more songs that are good to pick from, but also better songs because people have specialized in songwriting. Another thing I think that the CMI, Christian music industry, has done well is that I think it has been a net positive on evangelism. I've heard so many stories about people who, I mean, how many times have you heard the story that Christian music has been a part of their faith journey? It's been a part of them coming to Jesus. I mean, I've heard that story over and over and over again. And obviously, it's not just the music that leads them to Jesus. There's a lot more to it than that, but there's no doubt that Christian music played a part in their journey. And so I think overall, the Christian music industry has been a net positive to the evangelistic efforts of the church. I think that we have done a good job as a church in using music to reach the lost, because music is something that everybody loves. And so if we can create a Christian form of it, primarily corporate worship music, but there's a lot of other non-corporate worship music in the Christian music industry that has affected people's lives and drawn them to God. There are a lot of songs like that, and they have worked in people's faith journey to bring them to Jesus and hopefully to your church. Now, how does that impact your corporate worship gatherings? Well, I think one of the ways is that it has created more worshipers, right? When somebody comes and accepts Jesus, they hopefully, if it happens correctly, they become a worshiper of God, and they want to be plugged into a local church. And I think that the Christian music industry, it has aided in that process. And then the Christian music industry has also given us a greater glimpse into what other churches are doing, and then we can take that and see if it would work in our church. And I kind of talked about this in the last video that I made about how the Christian music industry is ruining corporate worship, because I said that we were sort of trend hopping, where we see something happening in another church or just in the Christian music industry in general, and we take it and we throw it into our church without thinking about the context of our church. But I think that the positive side of that is that we now have more ideas than ever before, and we can accept the fact that if something is working, whatever that means, whatever result you're trying to achieve, if something is resonating and connecting with people in another church and we see that, we can consider, would that work for the people in my church? Would that resonate in the same way? And it has become a lot easier to get ideas of what might work in our church instead of just making it all up on our own. People have already tested things, and we can look at it and be like, well, what they're doing at Elevation or what they're doing at Hillsong, maybe we want to implement some of the things that they're doing at our church if it fits in our context. And so we as worship leaders have got a bunch more ideas for corporate worship that we can try, and I think that that has been a net positive on corporate worship in the church. So let's lean away from the things that are ruining corporate worship from the Christian music industry and lean into the things that are fueling it. And I think that we can appreciate the Christian music industry because of that. Now, I want to give you a free training to help you improve your corporate worship at your church. It's called 5 Tips to Instantly Improve Your Worship Leading. In that training, I will give you 5 simple things. If you're just mindful of them and you do them on a consistent basis, they will instantly improve your worship leading. So check out the free audio training down below and learn how to lead an engaging time of worship with confidence this Sunday. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.